Spencer submitted his resignation at the request of the Pentagon chief. Today, Chief Eddie Gallagher's wife posted a reaction on her Facebook page. Just 2 words posted on Andrea Gallagher's Facebook page following the firing of Navy Secretary Richard Spencer. "It's over," she wrote. It's the latest chapter in the controversy surrounding her husband, Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher. Earlier this week, President Donald Trump signed orders to restore Gallagher to his full rank.
He told me that he was going to be restoring my rank back to Chief Petty Officer and also expunging everything from my record.
However, the military revealed it would be ordering him and 3 other officers to go before a review board that could kick them out of the elite unit. Gallagher was acquitted earlier this year of murdering a wounded ISIS fighter back in 2017, but was convicted of posing with the body of the dead prisoner. The Washington Post reports Spencer had privately proposed a deal to White House officials that if they did not interfere with proceedings against Gallagher, then Spencer would make sure Gallagher retired with his Trident insignia, a pin that is grueling to earn. The proposed deal contradicts what Spencer said publicly.
The President of the United States is the commander-in-chief. He's involved in every aspect of government, and he can make decisions and do things and give orders as he deems appropriate.
In his resignation letter, Spencer wrote the president deserved a Navy secretary who is aligned with his vision. He wrote, quote, "Unfortunately, it has become apparent that in this respect, I no longer share the same understanding with the commander-in-chief who appointed me." And it appears President Trump has already chosen a replacement for Spencer. He tweeted he will be nominating Admiral Ambassador to Norway, Ken Braithwaite, to be the new Secretary of the Navy.
And breaking tonight in Washington, just within the last half hour, the Pentagon says Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, is resigning. This is at the request of Defense Secretary Mark Esper, and it's over a controversy involving a Navy SEAL defended by President Trump. The Navy wanted to remove him from the elite unit. The Pentagon says Esper lost confidence in Spencer because of his comments on the situation.
Breaking news and a major shakeup at the Pentagon. Late today, the Secretary of the Navy forced out Defense Secretary Mark Esper, calling for his resignation for his handling of a case involving a Navy SEAL accused of war crimes while clashing with President Trump at the same time. Here's ABC's Stephanie Ramos.
Tonight, the Navy's top official, Secretary Richard Spencer, forced out. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper demanding his resignation over the handling of the case involving Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, saying in a statement, "I have determined that Secretary Spencer no longer has my confidence to continue in his position." Gallagher was acquitted by a military court of war crime charges in the killing of a teenage ISIS prisoner in Iraq, but convicted for illegally posing with the corpse of that teenager and demoted in rank.
Just want to retire peacefully with all the honors that I've earned, get back to my family.
Just last week, President Trump intervened in the case, ordering the Navy to promote Gallagher back to his rank, restoring his pay and pension. The Navy then announced it would review Gallagher's case, which could lead to him being kicked out of the SEALs and losing the highly valued Trident pin, identifying him in the elite community. But then President Trump publicly intervening again with this tweet. The Navy will not be taking away warfighter and Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher's Trident pin. This case was handled very badly from the beginning. Get back to business. But Navy Secretary Richard Spencer responded by saying he does not consider tweets in order. The New York Times reporting that both he and Admiral Colin Green, commander of the Navy SEALs, threatened to resign, something they deny.
I have not threatened to resign. I am here. I work at the pleasure of the president.
Tonight, the president tweeting about Spencer's firing, saying, "I was not pleased with the way that Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher's trial was handled by the Navy. He was treated very badly. I thank Richard for his service and commitment." Navy Secretary Richard Spencer just issued a statement saying he, quote, "cannot in good conscience obey an order he believes violates his sacred oath." Defense Secretary Esper says he's decided to let Gallagher retire as a Navy SEAL, keeping that Trident pin, Tom.
Which was something the president was fighting for as well. All right, Stephanie, thank you for that.
Well, we're learning more details tonight about the presidential pardon of an Oklahoma soldier. Army First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence is now making the trek home to Celeste, Texas. Lawrence from Hobart, Oklahoma, or Hobart. He was serving a 19-year murder sentence in Leavenworth Federal Prison. Lawrence was found guilty in August of 2013 for the shooting death of 2 civilians during a 2012 mission in Afghanistan. Lawrence thanked President Trump when he was released on Friday.
You know, it's kind of overwhelming. I wanted to join the Army and just, go be a soldier, and I didn't realize all this was going to happen. So it's kind of overwhelming for a country boy from the middle of nowhere. So I guess all I have to say is I really appreciate my new American family.
Well, the president also dismissed charges against Army Green Beret Major Matt Goldstein and Navy SEAL Edward Gallagher.
A victorious election campaign, a platform of non-intervention, but Donald Trump is still juggling wars. At home against fake news and the Democrats, and far away against terror. So it's hardly surprising he has a soft spot for the dogs of war. No, not this one, these ones. Walking free, courtesy of the president's generosity. And you know why? Well, when you've got almost 250,000 soldiers abroad, boosting morale and giving an incentive to put your life on the line in foreign lands, it's just what you have to do.
When our soldiers have to fight for our country, I want to give them the confidence to fight.
For some, though, Trump's words fail to ring true against a backdrop of human rights reports questioning the morality and lawfulness of American activity abroad. For those unconvinced, these latest pardons can be added to the already bulging file labelled murky military activity.
With this use of his powers, Trump has sent a clear message of disrespect for law, morality, the military justice system, and those in the military who abide by the laws of war. I would include the victims of these crimes, but have no illusion he cares for them. Utterly shameful.
Trump might have been an outsider when he took the reins in 2016, but his policy of whitewashing questionable U.S. military activity is a favored White House pastime. Previous administrations were also busy hushing up CIA crimes and ducking accountability. Barack Obama, for example, the very president who banned the CIA's torture techniques, went around doing some pardoning of his own, giving 2 soldiers who tortured detainees to death a free pass. Best not to dwell on the past, he said. Onwards and upwards.
For those who carried out some of these operations within the 4 corners of legal opinions or guidance that had been provided from the White House, I do not think it's appropriate for them to be prosecuted. As a general view, I think that we should be looking forward and not backwards.
And apparently it doesn't matter whether you're red or blue. Take George Bush. He was also pretty relaxed when it came to those secret CIA cellars.
And some believe our military and intelligence personnel involved in capturing and questioning terrorists could now be at risk of prosecution under the War Crimes Act, simply for doing their jobs in a thorough and professional way. This is unacceptable.
And while these soldiers might have been given a get-out-of-jail-free card, despite having been tried and convicted by a court, condemned by international watchdogs, and having the blood of civilians on their hands, I wonder if second-chance cards will be given so easily to those calling out the crimes.
Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism. He should be treated as an enemy combatant. WikiLeaks should be closed down permanently and decisively.
And I'm not for the death penalty, so if I'm not for the death penalty, the only way to do it, illegally shoot the son of a...
This is a matter that's gone beyond anything I'm aware of.
WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service.
U.S. cyber warfare people should use WikiLeaks for target practice.
It seems for U.S. officials there's still plenty up for interpretation, and that it's safer to be trigger-happy than dare to expose someone with just the click of your mouse.
All right, so joining me now is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the host of On Contact, Chris Hedges. Chris, this is the first time I'm talking to you, so it's an honor to finally meet and speak with you. I first want to start with this. You know, you were a war correspondent for 20 years. In the past, you know, we had Abraham Lincoln, who pardoned nearly 13,000 deserters. You had President Ford and President Carter. They pardoned draft evaders after the Vietnam War. One of the things that many presidents say is these pardons heal a nation. With President Trump doing this, does this really heal the nation? And are these pardons underreported? Do we know anything more about the actual numbers of pardons out there?
Well, first of all, Trump is following a long tradition within the executive branch of pardoning that very tiny, minuscule percentage of U.S. soldiers and Marines who are convicted of committing atrocities. Remember that the My Lai massacre in 1968, which saw between 300 and 500 unarmed Vietnamese villagers gunned down by a platoon led by Lieutenant Calley, saw Calley under house arrest for about 2.5 years, and he is now free. The U.S. government, after the exposure of the My Lai massacre by the great investigative journalist Cy Hirsch and Ron Riddenhauer, who was instrumental in documenting this, set up the War Crimes Investigative Unit. And Nick Turse wrote a very good book called Kill Anything That Moves, which is a phrase used by military commander in Vietnam towards free fire zone. And so there are hundreds of cases of atrocities just from that war alone. And what's interesting is how few people are ever convicted, the kind of whitewashing that the military does of its own atrocities. And then those few examples, as we just saw, who get out, very rarely serve their sentences. So what Trump is doing is contiguous with what, and I think you pointed out, Obama did it as well, what most members of the executive branch, but as somebody who spent 20 years overseas covering wars, what's so frustrating is how most of these atrocities go either unreported and almost always unpunished.
And, you know, Chris, actually, that reminds me of, if you've seen the documentary The Kill Team, where you had an infantryman, Chris Winfield, who was kind of the whistleblower, saying how, you know, there was people in his platoon that were killing unarmed civilians. And this was back in 2010. And one of the staff sergeants said it's really easy to cover all this up. And when you look at 2010, the crimes that these men who are just being pardoned, it was around that same time. And it kind of unloaded a number of war crimes. You know, is it over there, is it really easy to brush them under the rug so easily?
Yeah, because there's no counting. I mean, when you occupy a foreign country, I mean, there's different types of war, but the occupation of a foreign country is one that Robert J. Lifton calls it an atrocity-producing situation. Why? Because every time you leave the wire or the perimeter of your base, you are in a hostile environment. And the enemy who is attacking you is often elusive. That's what improvised explosive devices are about, ambushes. And so you're taking casualties, but you can often never strike back. And that frustration and even anger at the casualties or the killings that your own unit is taking morphs very quickly into a kind of blame for everybody who is being occupied, including civilians. And so you take it out on civilians. You had in Iraq, I spent 7 years in the Middle East, covered the first Gulf War, went into Kuwait with 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. You have them going into these mud-walled villages, sometimes after taking casualties, and they will use their belt-fed saws just to blast away at the the huts along the side of the road. They never stop to count what the civilian casualties are. So I think that's an important point. The second point is that in a combat situation, you have very little time to react. And so you often shoot first and ask questions later, and oftentimes that's civilians.
And President Trump is issuing a pardon for 2 service members, Army Lieutenant Clint Lawrence and Army Green Beret Major Matt Goldstein. Lieutenant Lawrence was convicted of what's being characterized as a war crime while he was deployed to Afghanistan.
Not characterized as a war crime, was a war crime. So pretty sure shooting up a group of civilians in Afghanistan and then covering it up and then being convicted of it is a war crime. And that war criminal, Clint Lawrence, went on Fox and Friends, Donald Trump's favorite morning show, let's call it that, garbage, to praise him effusively.
I love you, sir. You're awesome. You and your, I'll say this, Mr. President, I wish you had a better team around you. You need more people watching your back. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate President Trump and Vice President Pence. And I love them. They're awesome. Yeah. They're great people. To me, it's life-changing. To my family, it's life-changing. To our military, it's life-changing.
Ugh, gross. And a reminder that that guy gunned down civilians, and it's certainly life-changing for the military too, especially because the Pentagon and high-ranking military leaders were entirely opposed to Donald Trump's move. Yeah, you know it has to be bad when even the Pentagon isn't on your side, and this war criminal actually addressed that on Fox and Friends and went after those Pentagon officials.
Folks that start putting stars on their collar, anybody that's got to be confirmed by the Senate for a promotion, they're no longer a soldier, they're a politician. And so I think they lose some of their values. And they certainly lose a lot of the respect from their subordinates when they do what they did to me, which was, throw me under the bus. Now, not to sound like a victim or anything, because I'm not. I think, I'm happy. I'm actually proud of everything that happened to me because it turned me into a better person. It gave me an opportunity to get closer to this country.
The gall of this guy. I'm so glad that the murder made you a better person, dude. Could you just have gone to therapy maybe? Also, I'm pretty sure that's breaking rank. Isn't the military all about hierarchy? And now you're criticizing the top leaders in your military for doing the bare minimum of holding your war crimes accountable. And a reminder of what he did, along with the other 2 accused war criminals who Trump pardoned. The 3 pardoned are Army First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, Army Major Matthew Goldstein, and Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer Edward Gallagher. Lawrence was freed after serving 6 years of his 19-year sentence for shooting a group of civilians in Afghanistan, then covering it up. Goldstein was awaiting trial for allegedly murdering an unarmed Afghan civilian. Gallagher stabbed an ISIS fighter who was undergoing surgery for a battle wound, shot 2 civilians from a sniper's nest in Iraq, and threatened to kill his subordinates if they informed on him. He was ultimately acquitted on 6 other charges, but convicted of posing for an unofficial photo with a corpse. So these men are disgusting. I have zero sympathy for them. Yeah, and then and Trump pardons them because, he hates Muslims. And the Fox and Friends crew ended that segment by getting extremely choked up and thanking that criminal for his service. No mention, by the way, of the civilian murder or the cover-up, though. Yeah, we all know where their priorities are, but that was so over the top. And again, this was so egregious that even the Pentagon was against it. So what happened to being pro-military, or you're just pro-military members that kill Muslims? In reality, this is just red meat for Trump's base that loves the wars abroad, loves that these war crimes were committed. And what this says is that the military is above the law, and that is as fascist of a signal as they come.